Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. It's a frontline update for the 21st of January 2023. Let's get to the news, overnight news and whatnot before we get onto the front lines. As per usual, we'll go to the Ukrainian figures for the losses for Russians yesterday. Now, all the usual caveats, accuracy, propaganda, there aren't really a Russian equivalent to this. There isn't really one. So what they say, it's pretty indicative. This always interesting to get to give you a sense of what happened yesterday. 860 personnel liquidated, so that is definitely a high number. That's a high number. Yesterday, it would seem, therefore, it was a bad day for the Russians. One tank, 15 APCs, so that's a pretty high number as well. 6 artillery systems, 1 MLRS. That's been fairly consistent, and they've been attriting the Russian artillery systems quite a bit over the last few weeks. 5 drones, 15 vehicles and fuel tanks, 3 pieces of special equipment. Never quite sure what they are. Could be radar systems, could be all sorts. 15 vehicles and fuel tanks, if they are predominantly fuel tanks or trucks, supply trucks, that's always good because Russia don't have too many of those types of vehicles. They're predominantly a railway army, and even at the beginning of the war a year ago, that was a low number comparatively. They had about 4,000, I think, compared to America's 100,000 in terms of supply trucks. You've seen 4,918 vehicles and fuel tanks, so that's a wider range, but that is always going to hurt them logistically speaking. Okay, let's move on. Fuel tankers and several railway tankers are burning in the Russian city of Angarsk, Irkutsk region. Russian media reports. So Russia on fire. Hashtag Russia on fire. Again, that's something that happens frequently. Now, Ramstein happened yesterday, and there's a lot of people that came away thinking, well, that was a damp squib. There was not a lot of announcements. My opinion was most of it was announced before Ramstein. So in the lead up to Ramstein, everyone was jostling to say, we're giving Ukraine this, we're giving Ukraine this. And it was like a virtue signaling brinkmanship competition, which is great. I'm a big fan of that. So we had a lot of announcements that led up to Ramstein. And then at Ramstein, not really was announced since. I think Germany are giving €1 billion worth of military assistance, which will be really useful. However, no news on tanks. And Reznikov says, and indeed long-range ammunition, like ATACMS. Reznikov, who is the defense minister, says the Ramstein summit led to optimistic breakthrough. So actually, the Ukrainians are playing it fairly positively. He's also said that Ukraine is satisfied with the results of Ramstein. Not all help was announced publicly. That is going to be your key. So if anything, if genuinely Reznikov and the Ukrainians are happy with Ramstein, then there's probably, because a lot of people are questioning why there are all these announcements. Why are we telling Russia what they're getting? And in some sense, it doesn't particularly matter. So some claims are, other claims is they'll find out anyway through intelligence, so on and so forth. In other ways, it's just purely political. It's political posturing. It has a political utility, whatever that may be. So Ukraine has apparently been told, hush, hush, this will happen, this will happen, this will happen. So we don't know. There will be things that have come out of Ramstein that aren't in the public information sphere. And if Ukraine are happy, then I guess we should be happy. It depends whether he's just saying that to appease foreign forces. Ongoing demonstrations in Berlin near the Bundestag demanding to free the leopards now. So this happened yesterday, and that is tantamount to there being quite a lot of public discord with regards to the leopards situation. On the flip side, there has been an announcement that that Ukrainian crews have been given a green light for training on leopards, not German leopards, but leopards in other countries that are probably still going to be given. Thing is, all this stuff needs to happen now. And now, Professor Michael Clark was talking about, if it doesn't happen now with the training schedule and the logistics setup that you need, then it's going to be too late for the counteroffensive and offensives in early 2023, in the late winter and into spring. You're not going to get this stuff out there quickly enough. But it looks like other nations might get their leopards to Ukraine irrespective of what Germany say. In the UK, if the UK stepped up and supplied longer range capabilities to Ukraine, that would be far more important than the UK main battle tanks. So we provided 12 Challenger 2s, and actually that's a drop in the ocean. That's not a game changer. It was hope that it would sort of grease the cogs of negotiation for Leopards to be given. It doesn't seem to have done that, although it might have done it in a way that other nations are going to try and give their Leopards, even if Germany say no. This is as a result. Some British officials have expressed openness to supplying longer-range missile systems to Ukraine amid the refusal by the United States to send long-range rockets known as ATACMS. My opinion is Britain might go. You might as well go. Yeah, in for a penny, in for a pound. You, we've already broken that seal in terms of main battle tanks. Just give them everything. Just Britain has a chance now to be leaders here and to get a bit of political capital in the Western world. And they might as well take it. I don't see why not. Interestingly, the USA will support the transfer of F-16 fighter jets by allies to Ukraine, so not their own. The American ambassador to the OSCE, Michael Carpenter, confirmed that Washington will agree with the idea of partners to transfer F-16 fighters to Ukraine. That's this is the defence grouping of the EU, I think, the OSCE. So that would be fantastic. They're not the newest of fighters. These have been around for 50 years. But there are upgrades, as we understand from all equipment gets made, and then rather than spend so much money designing new ones, you just kind of build add-ons and upgrade this and upgrade that, and it becomes almost a different piece of equipment. Then we move on to Mark Milley. So this is Phillips O'Brien saying, not sure this is being read entirely correctly. So Mark Milley said, General Mark Milley said something yesterday that people were a bit pessimistic about, and he was saying, as the head of the American armed forces contingent, saying it will be hard to eject Russia from every inch of occupied Ukraine in 2023. That's hardly being wildly pessimistic. He said, quote, for this year, it would be very, very difficult to militarily eject Russian forces from every inch of Russian occupied Ukraine. I think this is setting the information space for everyone to be fully accepting that this thing is going to be a long, protracted war, that it won't be over. All indications show that it won't be over in 2023. Just get used to it. So everyone's clamoring for some kind of game-changing bunch of stuff to be given to Ukraine, and Ukraine wrap this up within a couple of months. Job done. Thank you very much. That's not going to happen. This is going to be a long, protracted war, and people like Mark Milley know that, and they're now starting to say that very publicly. So people in the general public of the countries are used to that idea and don't give up on Ukraine. You've had a lot of people mentioning over the last few days, Ben Wallace in the UK, MOD, or Minister for Defence, saying, we're in this for the long haul. We are in this for the long haul. It will be a long haul. I've not seen this anywhere else, and lots of people have called on OSINT Defender for a source for this. US intelligence officials have reportedly suggested the Ukrainian General Staff that they should strategically withdraw from Bakhmut due to the extent of artillery and manpower resources that Russian forces have in the region. This provoked lots of conversation, lots of people sort of agreeing with that, lots of people saying, actually, they're already kind of doing that anyway. It's like a slow beat of the Russians, just slowly withdraw as it encloses and closes and closes. And other people saying what the sources are. I've understood the opposite to this. So take that with a pinch of salt. I would challenge that perhaps, but the idea is out there. I posted this early November. John Kirby showed, so this is no report saying that, and I did that as well. I showed this that there was evidence that North Korea is giving ammunition. There's railway logistics set up between Russia and North Korea to ship ammunition. And now John Kirby has shown satellite images of trains running between North Korea and the Russian Federation that carried ammunition for the occupying forces in Ukraine. As in ammunition to be aimed for. There is no doubt that this is a military alliance. So the White House is now officially saying North Korea is providing ammunition for Russia. There you go. And apparently in the early stage of the war, Bulgaria, and I already reported they have provided maybe a third of the ammunition for Ukraine. Well, now some people are saying that they delivered in the early stage of the war up to 40% of the diesel to power their vehicles. So Bulgaria has been this quiet, massively important ally for the Ukrainians. Right, let's get on to the front lines. Before we do so, let's have a look at the heat map for the shelling in the area, well, in along the whole front line, and basically pretty hard core all the way along, including sort of renewed amount in Zaporizhia, but not in the area which is uh, a place of a so-called offensive, which is further down to the west. But around Marinka and Avdivka, it looks like there's been quite a lot of shelling there, and in fact, all the way up the line. So let's go to our first port of call, which will be the northeast, to Kupiansk, Svatove, and Kreminna. So if we look at the Kupiansk to Svatove line here on my map, there's shelling. Russian shelling continues right up in this northwestern corner, up near Dvorichna. Kuzmivka is the scene of a lot of intense fighting. Both the Russians claim that Ukrainians are pushing against Kuzmivka, and the Ukrainians have claimed to have repelled a counterattack from the Russians in Novoselivska. ISW have claimed that, so we go to ISW and go down to their frontline updates. They have claimed that the Russians are using thermobaric artillery systems against the Ukrainian position near Novoselivska. So that might indicate that things are pretty heated up there. Just a little note: I was called out yesterday. Someone is saying, "Look, I'm really interested in what you say. However, I think you've got a Ukrainian bias." And I was like, "Yeah, I do have a Ukrainian bias. I am biased towards them morally and politically, but I just try and get my sources so that I get accurate information. There's no point pulling the wool over our eyes. There's no point being biased to the point of not being able to determine truth from propaganda." And he said, "Well, why do you use the ISW?" I was like, "You've got to understand." I've said this before, by the way, but I have to repeat myself sometimes for new viewers. You got to understand what the ISW is and how it reports. So every time they make a claim, there's a footnote afterwards. It's like Wikipedia. Don't slag off Wikipedia unless you know how Wikipedia works, right? Wikipedia is an excellent source. We all use it. It's as good as its sources, its own sources. And the claims are all about what's the citation for those claims. So if we look at the citation for these claims that are being made, this is around the 40 mark. So we've got Russian source, Ukrainian, don't know, Russian, German, Russian. Uh, Looks like that's neutral. Russian, ISW itself, Ukrainian, Russian. Ukrainian, Russian, Russian, um, Ukrainian, Russian, Ukrainian, Russian. In other words, I would say, over 60% of the sources used in their frontline analyses are Russian. So if you're saying ISW are biased and they're pro West, but all the claims they are making are from pro-Russian sources, then you've got it wrong. You don't really understand how ISW works. Now, some people will say, well, the way they set it out will be pro-West or whatever, maybe, but you look very carefully. The claims they say, they often put afterwards, the ISW cannot confirm these claims. But here are the claims. This is basically, ISW is an aggregator. It's kind of what I'm doing. I'm an aggregator of claims. Now, it's great because I don't then have to surf like 20 different sources to find out this information. ISW has done it for me. So that's why I use ISW. You'll find that, say, Russian sources claim, Ukrainian sources claim, they'll say that a Russian mill blogger claimed, right? So if you think, oh, this is so pro-West, it's like, well, no, it's telling you what the Russians are claiming. So it's just understanding what the ISW is and how it works. Again, I had to repeat myself there for that. So as we go further down south from Kuzmivka, so Kuzmivka is really important. It looks like the Ukrainians are putting pressure on there. They need that in order to get Svatove, but it's taking them an awful long time, as it is all along this front. Is something of a stasis there. There have been there's been activity around Zhitlivka, which is just to the north of Kreminna. So the ISW says a Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces tried to advance from near Zhitlivka. Toward Terny, another Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces attempt to reach Kreminna from the south and that fighting is intensifying around the settlement. So what that says is there's this push, as you can see, this bulge of Russian-controlled area towards Terny. north of Kreminna, and yet to the south of Kreminna, there's intense fighting very near to the city borders. So exactly what I said yesterday, this weird situation where the Russians seem to be doing well to the north, Ukrainians are doing well to the south. But if Ukraine wants to encircle Kreminna, then they need to be pressuring both sides of the city, or all around it, really. But that doesn't appear to be the case. And then we move on down to Bilorivka, and I think there's been a repelled Russian assault around Bilorivka, which is nothing unusual. That seems to happen all the time. And then we get on to Bakhmut. There have been repelled attacks around Kupiansk and Yanka there. So around here, the Russians are pushing just north of Spirna. As we come down to the sort of Solidar area, we have attacks repelled, everything that's been happening the last few days: Vasily, Rozdolivka, Krasnopolivka, Solidar, Blahadatny, Krasnohora, Paraskevivka, and Pidorodny. So lots of activity all around here. Not too much in terms of advances for the Russians there. Rebars say in the Soledar sector, Wagner assault units are fighting Ukrainian formations in all those places and are advancing towards Blahadatny. Southwestern Soledar Russian troops have dug in on the northern outskirts of Krasnohora. Yes, and are advancing towards its center. The enemy's artillery is indiscriminately shelling Solidar and its surroundings. Well, I wouldn't say it's indiscriminate. If you've just liberated the town, no one's left there, as it appears. Then that's what you do in war, right? During one of these strikes, military correspondent Anastasia Yelsukova was wounded and received medical treatment, which there's video footage of that. Yeah, well, that's what happens if you're a war reporter. Those are risks you take. So there's been not too much else to say around that northern area. I don't think there's been much movement, really. It's just pretty hairy around there. Well, German outlet Der Spiegel reported that German intelligence service has intelligence that indicates that Ukrainian forces are losing a 3-digit number of soldiers every day in the Bakhmut area. Wouldn't surprise me at all. Would not surprise me at all. Of course, as it continues, fighting in the Bakhmut area continues to be highly attritional for the Russian forces as well. That is also true, and I have seen some just reels and reels of footage of just bodies littering trenches, and they are all Russian bodies. But of course, there will be similar footage, I'm sure, on Russian Telegram channels of Ukrainian bodies as well. This is a tough fight in the area. Really, we are now going to come down a little bit further south. Let's have a look at what a War Mapper's map of Bakhmut looks like. As you can see, there's quite a lot of stasis there. There's no real movement for the Russians to the north and to the east, and in Opitny to the south. But it's whether actually there's been much to talk about in Klishchivka, which is where we'll go in a second. Sorry, one source commenting on Soledar did say War Monitor says Ukrainian unit from the 45th Separate Artillery Brigade destroyed a Russian forward operating base with significant amounts of officers in Soledar. So I forgot to mention that. Okay, let's go to the eastern suburbs of Bakhmut. And Rebar says, well, actually, they don't say too much about the eastern outskirts, but Suryak Maps, which is a pro-Russian source, says, meanwhile, on Bakhmut, the Russian army and DPR forces, again, doesn't mention Wagner at all, advance in Miazo Kombinat district and the nearby sawmill northeast of the city. So I had some advances yesterday. I've just cleaned up my map to reflect a slightly more accuracy there. So this is just south of Pidorodny. Going to the northeastern outskirts here, and there is an area just there that is under Russian control. I think that might be the sawmill, and they are trying to move into this northeastern area. But further down south, they've made some inroads into this area here. But I'm not sure about the art winery yet. That's been contested over the last week or so. As far as Maximenko Road is concerned, not too much information coming out of the eastern suburbs there. So it's around Opitny and south of Opitny. There's pushing up from Opitny. There's also increased shelling around this area. And we get on to Klishchivka. And it really does appear like Klishchivka has been captured by the Russians, at least the main settlement itself. So let's reflect that in my own mapping. So it's going to look at least like this, and possibly more so for the Russians. In fact, if you look at, well, let's go to a pro-Ukrainian source. So Russian recon units were spotted southwest of Bakhmut. They tried to take advantage of the situation around Klishchivka and bypass it north to Ivanivska. But also that Klishchivka is mostly occupied by Russian forces, confirmed by my sources on the ground. The hills northwest are contested, but still AFU dominant. Despite reinforcements, the front is difficult. Russian forces in Kurdyivka took some ground towards Divlivka along the canal. I already have that anyway. That last bit about Kurdyivka, I'll show you on my map in a second. But this map is much more generous to the Russians. So situation south of Bakhmut, Russian army and DPR forces, again, no Wagner, took control over Klishchivka, a town, and advanced around a water channel towards Ivanivska. So this shows that they have not only Klishchivka, but actually the entrenchments behind that. And if that is correct, I mean, no reports denies this, then that is a really big problem for the Ukrainians, because actually, you know, it's this area behind that's heavily entrenched, as you can see, all this entrenchment here around the road as it curves around, and this is an area that it appears that the Russians are in. So, you know, that's where the fighting should be really hard, because the Ukrainians are entrenched there. Well, according to Syriac maps, that is under Russian control. I don't know, because no report says this is still dominated, this area, by the Ukrainians. Just watch out. If Klishchivka properly falls, then it isn't long until even Ivaniivska will fall, and the ground lines of communication will get cut. However, this is what the ISW says. So Russian forces have claimed to have captured Klishchivka following Wagner Group financier Yevgeny Prigozhin's claim that Wagner Group fighters captured the settlement. The Russian MOD referred to Wagner Group fighters once again as volunteers of assault detachments, likely to downplay the Wagner Group's role in tactical advances, while also shielding itself from previous criticism that it does not acknowledge the Wagner Group's involvement in such advances. So there's that internal tussling going on. Russian sources continue to falsely assert that Russian forces are close to encircling Bakhmut. Russian forces have still not cut any major Ukrainian ground lines of communication, GLOCs, and Bakhmut into Bakhmut from Seversk, Sloviansk, and Konstantinivka. Russian forces would need to cut the majority of these GLOCs and advance further around Bakhmut to even begin an operational encirclement of the city. Russian forces are likely to achieve an operational encirclement in the near term, as recent offensives to capture small settlements of little tactical significance have likely further degraded Russian. So they're unlikely to achieve an encirclement. Degraded Russian manpower and equipment in the area. ISW continues to assess that the Russian offensive to capture Bakhmut is likely culminating due to Russian military's increasingly degraded operational capabilities in the area. I keep saying I think that's the case, but then Russia keep continuing their momentum. I thought they culminated, and Klishchivka was safe from being taken, and then Klishchivka appears to have fallen, and you are seeing continued Russian advances. They surely must be close to culminating. But the thing is, the Russian main regular armed forces have the ability to pile in loads of their mobilized troops. They've just got, this is a numbers game. The whole conflict is a numbers game, and Russia have much greater numbers than Ukraine. And they've got this kind of elbow room to be able to throw troops, to throw human beings at the problem, to solve it with sheer numbers. And I think Bakhmut is a great example of this happening. And the challenge for Ukraine is being able to bleed them as much as possible, in such a way that they will stop throwing humans at this. But will that happen? Is this just going to continue until Russia do get their success? And if they do get their success, will it be a cost that Ukraine will be happy with? Will they be content with saying, okay, we lost this many troops, but Russia lost this many, and therefore, even though we lost Bakhmut, there's a Pyrrhic victory, and it will aid us in our eventual victory in the whole operational area, or indeed strategically overall. Anyway, let's move on from Bakhmut. It's generally not looking great in Bakhmut. It's just a continuation of that kind of narrative. So let's go to Avdivka. Interestingly, Rebar misses out Avdivka, goes straight from Bakhmut to Marinka. But there was a big old attack in Avdivka from the Russians, I believe. So No report says today Russia conducted a fairly big attack on Avdivka from Opitny. This is the Opitny south of Avdivka. Several assault groups backed up by armored vehicles and tanks rushed into Avdivka from the west. Just like Vodyane recently, they ran into artillery and retreated with heavy losses. Footage soon. And then later on that evening, he said Russian forces today tried to attack Avdivka from the area of Opitny. I can write a whole summary, but let's keep it short. Russia did the same. Like they did in Vodyane some days ago, they lost a huge amount of personnel. We'll try to add footage as soon as possible. So this is bad news for the Russians in that area. So if we come down to Avdivka, just northwest of Donetsk, we have Vodyane, where the other day they tried to, they came to have taken the eastern parts of Vodyane, but it apparently came at quite a cost, and they've done an assault somewhere, not sure exactly. Then Opitny is mentioned, but then they talk about the west of Avdivka. So another big assault by the Russians, but repelled by the Ukrainians at some great loss, apparently, to the Russians. And then as we come further down south, we will wait to see the details coming out of that. We come on to Marinka, Krasnohorivka, Marinka, Pobieda. Again, repelled attacks of the Russians around there. No great news coming out of those areas other than that. Although Rybar says, as ever, that they're fighting on the western outskirts of Marinka, and that just appears to not be true. They keep claiming this. They're saying there's only 300 meters to go until they've cleared out the Ukrainians, and then the next day or the next tweet, they talk about how fighting is still in the center of Marinka. So take that with a block of salt. And then we sort of come down. There is some activity in the Vuhledar area. The Russians, according to Rybar, located some Ukrainian forces in the forests around the Vuhledar area, though I'm not exactly sure where that might be. But yes, and sent artillery fire their way. But other than that, we are moving towards the Orkhiv area, which is all the way along here, to talk about the counter attack or the offensive from the Russians that has been taking place over the last couple of days. Okay, quite a few claims going on from both sides about what's going on in this Zaporizhia area. So Rybar says, pro-Russian, in the Orkhiv sector, Russian troops liberated Lobkove. So some people already had that under Russian control, like Defmon and Mali Shirbaki, and pin down the enemy in Shirbaki. The capture of the villages will make it possible to increase pressure on the Kamiansky Stepova line. Russian units took control of Novoandrivka, Novodanilivka, and Malotokmachka. One of the settlements was cleared. Russian troops will be able to continue their offensive on Orkhiv. Southeast of Orkhiv, the Russian 291st Regiment pushed Ukraine from several points near Novopokrovka. And in the Polohi sector, units of the 5th Combined Arms Army occupied heights near the village of Malinivka. Ukrainian command is strengthening its defenses around there, expecting an offensive by the Russian forces in the area. Okay, so what this is basically saying is that the Russians have taken control of here, Stepova, Shibaki, towards these, there's all these places here that they may be either in control or pressuring quite a lot. No report says Russian forces claim there is an offensive, and several towns like Lobkova, just south of Stepova, are taken. For now, all I know is nothing has changed here, despite increased shelling and some attempted Russian pincer moves near Holyapol and Orikhiv. We'll try to verify. So again, not a lot of knowledge. Defmon says the AFU repulsed attacks in the area of Malotokmachka and Stepova. Russian sources claim great success, but videos tell a different story. Russian MOD claim they captured Lobkova, which I already had as under Russian control. Rybar made several claims that captured settlements in the Zaporizhia direction. Their accuracy is about as good as mine when I'm trying to take a pee after 12 beers. So that is his claim. He's pretty dismissive of the Rybar claims of what's going on in that area. So it's difficult for me to really know what's going on myself. I'll leave my map for a little bit. Let's see what the ISW say. Russian mill bloggers claim that unspecified elements of the 5th Arms Army of the EMD and the 58th Combined Arms Army of the Southern Military District also seized Mali Shibaki, and Novoandrivka, southwest of Orikhiv, and Novoandrivka, Malotokmachka, and Bilahora to the southwest of Orikhiv to enable direct ground attacks against the settlement from multiple sides. Prominent Russian nationalist media outlet Tsargrad reported that the claims are unverified. Right, so Russia themselves, a Russian source is saying that another Russian source's claims are not verified. A mill blogger reposted January 19th battle footage, and I showed you some pictures from this yesterday, from the Ukrainian general staff showing a platoon-sized, sort of 30 people group of Russian forces conducting a ground attack in the Zaporizhia Oblast. They were just literally running in the middle of massive open fields, no support, no artillery, no mechanization, nothing, just running at forward over a massive area. Just absolutely ridiculous. The mill blogger criticized Russian military command, rightly so, for allowing Russian forces to attempt a ground attack without heavy weapons or armored vehicle support, suggesting that Russian forces currently lack or are unwilling to dedicate the equipment necessary to sustain a prolonged offensive in Zaporizhia Oblast. Another mill blogger claimed that Russian forces may have conducted the localized attack to locate Ukrainian defensive positions so it's just using humans to locate defensive positions for an upcoming offensive, but conceded the Russian forces are only able to conduct limited operations with their current amounts of ammunition and manpower. So it is there are lots of claims about the Zaporizhia area that suggests that the Russians might be making some advances there, but then Ukrainian sources are denying that or denying the extent of that. So I will leave that for now, but there is a lot of activity going on in this Orikhiv area. That suffice to say that much at least. And the Russian mill bloggers have circulated pictures on January 20th of a destroyed Russian S-400 air defense system in the Zaporizhia Oblast, and the first confirmed loss of an S-400 in Ukraine. So there you go. There has been one previously observed in northern Crimea, but not in Zaporizhia or other occupied Ukrainian territories. So that is, good stuff there. But not too much else to report. There's routine fire going on across the Dnipro, shelling, etc., shelling around the Zaporizhia area again, but that's the city I'm talking about, Nikopol, Marnets, but no other news to say. So that is my frontline update. It's been a little bit rushed. I do apologise. I might not be able to do my extra video today due to other commitments, but hopefully that's been useful. Please like, subscribe and share. Thank you for your support, and all the ways you can support are down in the description below. Toodle pips, and I'll speak to you later. Hopefully, maybe not.